I worked on my game for 30 days, and in this video, I'm going to break down what my approach was and what I got done. I'm working on an action roguelike, and if it looks interesting to you, subscribe to the channel and like the video, because I'm going to be here for a while. But let's get into the new stuff and what I got done. So what I want to focus on this first week is redoing the Jello King boss fight. It needs an updated design, and I actually think for the most part, the attacks and everything about how it functions is pretty good. So I'll basically just be redoing the art and redoing the code so it's a bit easier to work with. But today, I want to spend a decent bit of time figuring out the new design. But anyway, here it is. I'm very happy with how it turned out. I had this idea to instead replace the gold crown with some kind of crystal or rock formation that resembles a crown. I think this fits more in line with the forest theme for this level, and it's almost like the king just kind of stumbled across this rock and crowned itself. Now I just need to get these new animations done tomorrow, and we'll see where we're at. So first I'm just breaking down and figuring out how many animations I need to make. So here I just listed out the initial ones I can think of. I'm sure there's going to be more, but it's a start. And just looking at this now, I've got a lot of work to do. Just finished today and I've got the idle animation and blow attack completed. I want each animation to smoothly transition into one another, with the idle animation kind of bridging them together. I went with this heavy breathing animation for it, something with a little bit of movement but not too much. Kind of gives off the impression that the king is a little bit out of shape, maybe a little bit overweight. The next animation I did was for the blow attack. I decided I wanted to charge up beforehand so the player knows what's coming, because it's going to be the hardest attack to dodge and will actually require competent use of the jetpack to avoid taking damage. So it's supposed to be like it's storing up its acid inside it and then releasing it all at once. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out and how much work I got done today. This is the animation for another attack. It doesn't have to be anything too exciting because you won't really be looking at it, you'll be too busy dodging projectiles. I spent most of my time today doing the enraged animation. So previously I had it so when bosses get to low HP, they become enraged and their attacks change a little bit and the fight gets more difficult. I thought it would be more interesting, at least for this boss because it's going to be in the demo, if the king undergoes a visual transformation during the boss fight. So when its HP drops below 30%, its crystal crown sinks into its stomach and gets absorbed, mutating its biology and giving it new attacks. It does make a little bit more work for myself because I'll have to do two versions of most animations, one before it's enraged and one after, but it's mostly just a recolor and replacing these goo balls with crystal shards, but I think the results will be worth it in the end. The next big challenge which I've been dreading is remaking the jump movement. It's by far the most complex animation and will require the most work, but I've just got to get on with it. This is what I've got so far. I've just been creating the main body shape and getting the animation fluid before I go any further. The body actually has a slight gradient to it, so I'll be replacing the red with a gradient once it's done. But you can see how simple the movement is in the other animations when you compare it to the jump animation. I've got the basic movement of the crown as well. It kind of jumps up and lags behind the rest of the body to hopefully make things feel a bit more weighty. This is where I'm ending today. I got more detail on the animation done and I'll finish it tomorrow. I'm very happy with how it's coming along. I think the white shine highlights really sell the bulgy, slimy impact. It just needs to be paired with some in-game effects like screen shake. So I finally finished the jump animation, and overall I'm very happy with how it turned out. I tried the best I could with the goo balls inside to make them swirl around when it jumps, and stuff like keeping these inner blobs consistent in shape and size when it moves was pretty challenging and took a while. There's still a little bit of cleanup to do before it's final, but it's basically done. I also did some enraged animations, which thankfully don't take too long. The only time consuming part is aligning all these crystals. There's also some other parts I gotta fix. So for the enraged jump animation, it doesn't have a crown, so I need to clean up behind the crown when I do that and make that look not bad. And here it is, all done, looking pretty good, and we can see all the animations together. It's looking pretty nice. Today I got to work on the death animation, which thankfully will only happen when it's enraged, so I don't need to make two variations of it. While doing it, I realized how much I liked the death eyes, which are inverted from the original, so I thought it would be cool to just keep those eyes for all of the enraged animations. I think it makes it look far more menacing, but also like it's been zombified or something. The previous version included a big splat animation at the end of the death, but I think I'm gonna instead do this with code and particles and in-game effects. If that doesn't work out, I might just animate it. I then finished the intro animation. I couldn't really think of a good idea of something that I could feasibly do in a short amount of time, so I thought it would just be fitting if it drops in from the sky and then maybe it's just idle for a few seconds before the fight begins, kind of conveying that it really is just this brainless giant blob with no motives to attack you, other than that you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. But yeah, that's about all the animations done. Next I need to make it come to life in the game. Alright, so we got the animation set up in GameMaker. This might not look like much, but it's actually all of the timings for all the attacks and states done. The boss now cycles through its attacks correctly as it should. There's also a variable I can switch on and it will automatically transition to its enraged animations. And the last thing I did today was giving the boss HP and letting your attacks damage it, allowing the enraged mode to activate upon low HP, and also the death animation plays when it dies. Today I got some attacks programmed in, mainly the jump movement and blow attack. It's still got a ways to go, but it's beginning to look like a boss fight. A big difference I made from the original is to the blow attack. It now repels the king and the projectiles spread out and change direction a bit, making it more difficult to dodge, hence why it has such a long charge up. I think this might be the attack most players fear, but it's still a level 1 boss fight, so I don't want to make it too difficult. I actually took a little bit of a break today and decided to start compiling and editing all the footage gathered so far, so I'm thinking I'll finish the boss fight attacks tomorrow, and then maybe move on to something else for the next week. I'm actually pretty burnt out working on the boss, so I switched over to do some UI work today. There's still a massive amount of work to do on the boss, but in terms of fully implementing attacks and effects and balancing, that's like another week of work. But my focus now is on the HUD and UI. I decided I didn't want the UI elements to touch the edge of the screen, because it might lead to some problems later on when I'm supporting different screen sizes, so I basically just rounded the edges and left room between the edge of the screen. I also realized that some of the functionality with the UI elements weren't going to be as useful as I wanted, and also just ignore these hieroglyphics right now. That will be cleaned up tomorrow. Probably makes a bit more sense what these are now. These are the player's current stats. So previously these stat displays were kind of split up between two different UI elements, but I re-evaluated that design choice and I thought it was pretty stupid, so I'm putting them together in one place, and there will be options to hide them if you don't want to see them. Next I made some UI icons that I hope do a good job representing their stat. Looks good with the different UI colors as well. And now you can hover over the icons with the cursor and it says what stat it is. Some more UI polish, and I kind of normalized the displayed stats just to make it easier to gauge how good something is, I guess, using smaller values. And some back-end stat values don't really mean much to the player out of context, so I just transformed them into values that are easier to interpret. Today I just did some concepting on the artifact pickup box. It will definitely look different and I'll change it when it's implemented, but I wanted something like this. This is usually what I do when I'm coming up with new UI stuff. I'll work on top of a screenshot and see what works in the game before I implement it. Okay, so I got a start on implementing it today. I made it a little bit wider and obviously it's using the correct fonts now. I'm having a little bit of trouble making the system for text boxes. Basically, I should be able to give a max character amount per line and then it should automatically move text to a new line, but also not split the words and stuff like that. So there's a bit more work to do to get that done tomorrow, but the system will be used in quite a lot of parts of the game, so it's pretty important that it works well. I got the text boxes working as you can see here, and this is just an example text to fill the space right now. You can take it as every description and name you see in this video is probably a placeholder anyway. The artifact info also shows you the stat changes it applies when you pick it up. I'm kind of making it a point that the game will try and explain itself the best it can, so you'll probably be told exact stat changes and effects of artifacts, as long as you've collected them previously. So new artifacts will still hold their mystery, but if it's an artifact you've already picked up before, to save you time from looking up its effects, like some other roguelikes, it just tells you what they are here before you pick them up. Next I did some more polish on the box and did more accurate descriptions with some spelling mistakes. Making effects for the artifacts will still be difficult depending on the intended effect, but the new stat changing system is really easy to use. Each artifact just has an array that gets added to or subtracted from the player's stats when you pick up or drop it, and then the game automatically displays some information depending on that array. Today I thought it was time to start tackling the inventory system and all the UI that comes with it. First I gotta figure out how I'm gonna do it and what features it needs. I haven't fully explained how the inventory will work. I've said a little bit in previous videos, but basically there's two separate inventories. One for the artifacts you'll collect on the run, and one for the permanent inventory that you can use to bring items in and out of a run. I'll explain this in detail when I get the UI implemented in a day or two. I think this is similar enough to what I want. I decided to split each inventory, which going forward I'll refer to as the item inventory and the artifact bag, into two separate tabs in the UI. So this is the view of what the item inventory will look like. I made a lot of changes to how it will work, and of course it will look different in game. This is just a mock-up. And here it is, still no functionality. I had to do a lot of back-end stuff for the inventory to set it all up, but it's displaying the right data in the right places, and that's good enough right now. So I actually got the inventory system looking pretty good right now. I think it's time I fully explain everything. So along with the artifacts that you collect during a run, you also collect items. Artifacts go into your artifact bag, and items go into your item inventory. This is a permanent inventory in that as long as you survive a run, you keep the items in it and can stash them at your base in between runs. Artifacts are only in effect for the run you collect them on, like passive items in the Binding of Isaac or boons in Hades. They disappear whether or not you survive a run. Items are different. They can be materials for crafting, they can be consumables, or stuff for NPC quests, but also equipment. The player has 3 equipment slots where they can equip an armor, weapon, and jetpack mod. These mods change the player's stats while they're equipped. The important thing to remember about anything in your inventory, including anything equipped, is that if you die, you lose it all. I know a lot of people don't like stat-changing meta progression in roguelikes, roguelites, and I'm not too keen on it either. There will be other meta progression in the base and in the levels, but in terms of the player stat upgrades, this inventory system is about it, and it's very easy to lose, and I feel it ups the stakes for a run. So for example, you craft a really good armor mod, it encourages you to take things a bit more cautiously because you don't want to die with it and lose it. One more thing to note about equipment is that it will always be a give and take situation. So a weapon mod might increase damage but reduce rate of fire on your weapon. Like armor for instance, armor's main thing is that it reduces incoming damage by a percentage, so it's pretty valuable. To offset this, equipped armor will always reduce the player's movement speed, and it will take up a lot of space in your inventory. The player has a max carrying capacity. Similar to Skyrim's system if you're familiar with it. Equipment are the heaviest items to carry because they change player stats and they're very valuable. Carrying more than your max carry capacity will halve your movement speed and double your jetpack consumption rate, basically making the game unplayable. So you'll have to drop stuff to keep your carry weight below max. This is a great system because it also means you can't stack your inventory with loads of overpowered consumable items. The limitations I've implemented address most of my worries with this inventory system. Mainly, I just don't want the player to be too overpowered. Your main upgrades should be from artifacts, not items. Consumable items will grant varied effects, some timed, some permanent, as in permanent for that run, but they'll take a certain amount of time to apply, so kind of like using a shield pot in Fortnite, you need to find a safe area to use it, and you can't really use it mid-combat. I hope that explains it clearly, but yeah, the game is much more of a roguelite than roguelike, but not the same kind of roguelite like Hades or Rogue Legacy where you can gradually permanently increase stats. Nothing in terms of stat upgrades is really permanent in Sundercore. This inventory system is a pretty huge part of the game, and I've been planning it for quite a while, even videos from years ago, but I never got around to doing it because there was so much other gameplay stuff to work on. Anyway, let me know what you think about it, and if you think there's any problems with it. I may already have solutions in mind, but I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. Today I added the different tabs so you can switch between different UI pages. And I also added the function to scroll through the inventory and did a lot of exception and error handling stuff. The artifact bag is implemented, and you can now inspect artifacts you currently have. Everything's still missing a bit of polish, but functionality is what's important right now. Okay, a little bit of a visual overhaul on the UI, changed some stuff around and cleaned up everything. I still haven't implemented some of the new stuff, so there's some visual bugs like this, but it looks nice with the different UI colors. Color is used a lot in my game to indicate rarity and stat changes. It's important for players to be able to distinguish between common and legendary, so I added some accessibility options to change palettes for different color blindness, and an option to enable text to make power levels even more clear. It really didn't take that long. The hard part was coming up with the palettes for each type, because funny enough, color blindness really limits your color choices, but you can make do with various saturation and darkness levels, creating different distinct colors. Today I decided to overhaul the UI design again, but this time better. I always loved the idea of a game's UI menu being in like a Game Boy or some kind of handheld device, and I thought like, what am I doing, saving this idea for a different game? Why not just use it now? I also changed the tab switching visual to something a little better. This way new tabs can fit in easier, so maybe like in the hub area, you don't need access to your ability or artifact tabs, so maybe they disappear, but you get access to a base storage and crafting tab. Added some button prompts. I still need to add a whole system for button rebinding, but in the meantime, I made it so when I press keyboard buttons, it presses buttons on the gamepad on the UI. You can now drop artifacts, although the stat changes aren't applied yet, Some artifacts restore HP upon initial pickup, so it's important that the player dropped artifacts do not have this property, or else you could just pick up and drop artifacts and get full health. So the game needs to remember if an artifact is player dropped or not, so that took a little bit of work to get done, because obviously when you're switching between rooms, it deletes and respawns artifacts. The next thing I want to focus on is the quest system. The two most common quests will be bounties and fetch quests. There will be other types, and I want to leave room so that it's not too difficult to implement new types, but I'm starting with these two right now. There's a good bit of back-end stuff to get done for this, so I'll have to do that first and then get some UI done. I'm finishing today with the basics of the UI down. I have a pretty good idea of how I'm going to structure it, but there's still a lot to do, both on the back-end and front-end. I have two test quests I can add now. One is a bounty quest and the other is a fetch quest. Both can be given multiple objectives to complete, although quests can't be completed yet. I had to create a load of backend stuff to call the item and enemy names and information. So in other words, the item and enemy information all comes from one place, so if I rename something, I just change it in one location. This works out because I'll eventually be making the information tab, which will act as a kind of wiki for everything in the game. I decided to change how the stats are displayed on the HUD, mainly because I thought this was too long and I kind of figured this stat box might actually fit nicely in the bottom left of the screen. There will be options in the settings to change when these display, so maybe you only want to see the stats when you go to pick up an artifact, or maybe you want them up when you're out of combat, or just indefinitely. The default would probably be to show when you're picking up an artifact. You can also equip quests, so although every quest is active from when you get it, the quests can be completed in any order as well. You can choose to display a quest on the screen so you can better follow its progress. This also has some display options. The quest system is pretty much done. You can start and finish both bounty and fetch quests. The bounty quests were very easy to implement. When you start a bounty quest, it checks the global stats for how many of an enemy you've killed. This number then gets saved in a data structure. When you kill an enemy, it increments its global death stat. And then to complete the bounty, it will compare the global death stat to the saved stat in the data structure. And the global death stat should be the bounty number bigger than the saved number. This was actually the easier of the two to implement. The fetch quest works by comparing the amount of an item in your inventory to the amount needed, but the game can't do this check all the time because it's expensive. Because if you have an inventory with a load of items, then it needs to loop through all the items to find the right one to then compare the amount. And if it's doing that every game step, then it's going to be pretty slow. So a few functions later, the game does the check only when you pick up an item or drop an item. This sounds really easy, but was actually kind of a headache. When you're getting data from arrays to plug into other arrays inside arrays to then plug into functions that return an index to plug into another array, things get confusing. But that's done now, and there's no NPCs yet, so walking over this red square checks if you've completed all the objectives for a quest, and then marks it complete if you have. At this point, I miscounted and thought I had already done 30 days, but apparently not. So I just cranked out some art for some consumable items, and yeah, that about does it. 30 days.